This is Nick Black, and today I'm talking to filmmaker Monte Hellman, and I'm in the Santa Monica Mountains at Monte's home. And Monte, thank you very much for taking time to talk with us.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm here. I'm in my own house. I mean, why wouldn't it be a pleasure?
Exactly. What led you into films?
Well, I think I remember going to films from the time I was about 4 years old. That's my earliest memory anyway, and my earliest memories were seeing films. I remember Tarzan and The Lone Ranger, and I think I was hooked from the beginning just because it was such a wonderful way to live out your fantasies.
And when did you start considering it as a career?
Oh, I think I didn't dare consider it as a career because when I grew up, I had the impression, probably fostered by my parents who liked to instill fear in me, that you had to, be connected, that you had to have some relatives in the business or something. And so I initially thought of a career in radio, ironically. And as I got further into my college career, I began to think more and more about movies, and I did graduate work in cinema at UCLA. I'd gone to undergraduate school at Stanford University.
What were your parents' wishes for young Monte? Were they agreeable?
Well, once they knew that I was picking something in show business as opposed to being a lawyer or a doctor or something, they kind of just became resigned to their fate.
Now, what was the step between UCLA and Roger Corman?
Well, initially, after UCLA, I became involved in what they called Little Theater. I had a summer stock company in Northern California. Then I came back to Los Angeles and began working a little bit in film as a film editor or as an assistant film editor, and then did some more theater work in Los Angeles. Roger Corman became involved in my theater company, and then that led to my making films for him.
Okay, so how did you get your first break directing?
Well, as I said, Roger had invested in my theater, and when my theater was torn down, literally, by a company that wanted to convert it into a movie theater, Roger said, well, you should look at that as the handwriting on the wall. And he offered me a film to do.
So was it Beast from the Haunted Cave?
Beast from Haunted Cave, yeah.
So how was the experience?
It was horrifying because I guess I was shocked to discover how little I knew. And I discovered most of my mistakes not on the set, but in the cutting room afterwards, watching the editor curse me for doing this or that or whatever. And so I really began to see that the place to learn about film was the editing room. Even though I had some experience editing before this, I really decided to edit my own pictures, and I learned as I went along. I was kind of like pay as you go.
Right. Have you always edited your own films that you've made?
I've always edited my own films, except for Beast from Haunted Cave.
A film called Ski Troop Attack, which had a similar cast. Now, I know that you filmed shooting and riding the Whirlwind back-to-back. Was that one of these back-to-back?
It was back-to-back. Ski Troop Attack was actually a Corman picture, and I was hired a couple of years later to add about 10 minutes of footage to it because he had originally shot the films as companion features for a double bill in a theater, and then when television became a big market, he needed them to be longer. So I did about 4 pictures for Roger where I expanded them by about 10 minutes each.
Roger Corman is an interesting character, just for the simple fact that so many Roger Corman alumni have gone on, yourself included. Now, Roger Corman, did he give young fellas like you a break, whereas in mainstream Hollywood it was impossible to get a break?
I think without Roger, I can't imagine how I would have got a start without Roger, and I think that was true of probably Scorsese and Coppola and so many other people.
Jack Nicholson?
And Jack Nicholson. Well, Jack Nicholson, for actors, it's not quite as difficult, and I think Jack Nicholson would have been an actor with or without Roger, but I think for directors, it's much harder to get a start. I think Roger, I owe him a tremendous debt. Plus, I learned a lot from Roger.
Let's go into Back Door to Hell, which I believe was shot in the Philippines with Flight to Fury.
They were shot back-to-back in the Philippines. They were both made for Robert Lippert, who was, I guess, Roger's competitor. And Lippert had a contract at 20th Century Fox, and he made Back Door to Hell for Fox. Flight to Fury, he stole in the sense that he had all this crew and equipment that had been shipped over to the Philippines by Fox, and so he didn't have to pay for that. And so he made a second film for himself.
Is that why they were shot in the Philippines?
No, they were shot in the Philippines because it was cheap to shoot in the Philippines, just in general. But since the equipment and the actors and everybody was over there, a lot of the actors, we had to bring some more over for Flight to Fury. But since everything was there, he could literally steal a second movie for half what it would normally cost. That's why I made 2 pictures.
Right. How was the experience shooting in a foreign country?
I've shot many foreign countries, but the Philippines was interesting because it had the attitude of tomorrow. Anything that could be done today could be done tomorrow just as easily. And so you really you always were nervous that things weren't going to be ready on time, but somehow they were.
Flight to Fury was written by Jack Nicholson. What was he trying to do? Was he just trying to expand his acting career by writing as well?
When I first got to be friends with Jack, which was on a picture called The Wild Ride, and I was associate producer on that one, it became apparent to me that Jack had talents beyond those of just acting, and I encouraged him to direct and write, and we decided that we would start writing together at that time. He wound up writing 2 scripts for me with my partial participation, but essentially they were his scripts, and I think he's a terrific writer.
Yeah, because he also wrote one of my favourite films, The Monkey's Head. Let's talk a little bit about the shooting now. I've looked up the Internet Movie Database, and the guy who's made a comment, one of the reviewers, and he said, "Not sure I get it, but I do like it."
Well, I could make a joke and say, not sure I like it, but I do get it, but I like the shooting, and I've had some interesting comments over the years. The first place that we played the film was at the Montreal Film Festival in 1966, and I remember getting phone calls at 3 and 4 in the morning, just after the screening, from people who said they couldn't go to sleep, they were arguing about the movie, and would I please answer their questions?
I suppose their questions would have been about the end.
Their questions were mostly about the end, yeah.
Well, that was my first introduction to a Monte Hellman film. I saw it on Australian TV on a Friday afternoon and watched it all the way through, and I was just blown away. And after that, I've always looked for your name on the credits. So, is that a favourite of yours, Monte?
My favourites keep changing depending on what I've seen lately, or else I learned to hate movies of mine too. But I must say, I just had the experience of doing an audio commentary on the shooting at a number of other films for DVD, and seeing the shooting again, I must say that I liked it. I really felt that maybe it was one of my favorites of my films.
Where did you shoot it?
We shot it around Kanab, Utah, in beautiful country. I've traveled there many times since, and recently, even earlier this year, I was there on the same locations where we shot. And it's just incredible country because the mountains are all striated with rainbow-like colors, so it's really like looking at a rainbow in the hills, and it's incredible.
Did you know of this area before you started?
No. Jack and I went all over the Southwest looking for the location for the 2 pictures, for the shooting and ride in the Whirlwind, because we had to find one place that was suitable for both pictures, and the only place we could find was Kanab.
Shooting them both back to back, was that a monetary reason?
It was Corman's idea. We had a deal with him to do a picture, and he reneged because he felt it was too European a subject. The story was about abortion, and so he chickened out, but he said, "But I'll let you do a Western." And so by the time we finished lunch, because we were making the deal over lunch, he said, "Well, as long as you're making one, may as well make 2, because you can make 2 for as cheaply as you can one." You know? And so that's how we wound up making 2 back to back.
Now, the movie that you're probably most associated with, correct me if I'm wrong, is Lane Blacktop. That was for Universal?
That was made for Universal.
A studio picture. What was the genesis of that? Did Universal come along, see the shooting or whatever Monte Hellman film and say, "We want Monte Hellman to do a film for us"? Or how did it all come about, Monte?
Well, it came about because the producer, Michael Laughlin, had seen the shooting and ride in the Whirlwind and knew about the tremendous kind of excitement there was about the 2 films in France at that time. And so he asked me if I would do this film, Lane Blacktop, and he had a script that was really a pretty terrible script.
That was the original?
That was the original Will Corey script.
Oh, okay.
And I shouldn't make these defamatory comments.
They'll never know.
But I said, well, I really like the idea, but I think I would need to have a new script written. And Michael was very agreeable. He said, sure. And so I found Rudy Wurlitzer, and I gave him the script, and he couldn't read it. He said, he read 5 pages, I can't read this. And I said, well, you don't have to. The basic idea is a cross-country race between 2 cars. And so he literally created a whole new script, which I think is wonderful. He's a great writer.
Also, a question I'd like to ask, no character in the film has a name.
That's not true. No character in the film has a name. I mean, every character in the film has a name, but nobody bothers to mention their name. We don't learn their names in the film. As happens so much in life, I find that I almost never call somebody by their name, unless I'm calling them from another room, if you want to get their attention. But if you're just talking to people, you don't use their name a lot. And so they just never got around to even asking each other what their names were,
Now, the casting is fascinating because you cast Dennis Wilson, a Beach Boy, and James Taylor, another pop star in their day. Now, Tell us a bit about the casting, because that would have been quite unusual, and did you have Universal's blessing?
Well, I went through a lot of young actors before I decided to cast non-actors. At the time, James was not a big star. He became a star while we were shooting. He had his first hit record, Fire and Rain, while we were on the road, and we were watching it climb the charts, enjoying that process.
Was his ego growing?
I don't know if it was or not. But the thing is, the picture was actually developed at another studio, not by Universal. We did screen tests at the other studio and did the casting, and then they decided not to make the picture, and we went to Universal among several other studios, and we came with a package. We said, these are the actors, and this is the script, and this is the director, and so forth. And so it was take it or leave it. They decided they wanted to make the picture, and they liked the cast.
It was a superb cast. They just seemed just right. Also featured the tragic Laurie Bird, and also an astonishing performance from Warren Oates.
Warren Oates was really my alter ego, in the sense that once I discovered him, I couldn't think of making a picture without him.
It was a shame that he wasn't nominated for Best Actor, but I suppose I don't think it would have been the type of film that the Oscar people would have gotten into in those days.
Well, they would have if it had been a hit, but he came within one vote of winning the New York Film Critics Award, and he got beat out by Gene Hackman for The French Connection. Yeah.
You completed Monty, and then what happens? The public didn't get into it, or was it the studio just didn't market it properly, or what was the reason?
Well, I think it was a little bit of both. I'm not sure that if they had marketed it well, whether it would have had a broad appeal, but as it turned out, they didn't market it at all. It opened in New York literally without one newspaper ad, and the excuse was that it was opening on the 4th of July weekend, and everybody would be out of town, so nobody would read the papers. Well, if nobody's going to read the papers, then how you expect somebody to come to the movies?
How was the critical reviews at the time of the opening?
It got sensational reviews. I mean, not universally sensational, but Time Magazine, Newsweek, the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, it got really, really phenomenal reviews.
Now, we were just talking beforehand that it's got a real long life. People still want to see Lane Blacktop, and it seems to be attracting new generations of an audience.
Well, it's wonderful. I mean, to feel that you've made something that is finally reaching an audience, that people are moved by it, they're inspired by it. I get a lot of people who are young filmmakers who come to me and say that that was the reason that they decided to make a film or to make movies. And that's very, very gratifying, and it makes me feel better than almost anything.
Was one of those young filmmakers a certain person called Quentin Tarantino, perhaps?
Well, he never said that that was the film that inspired him to make movies, but he does like my work. I think he probably prefers Riding the Whirlwind. That's his favorite of my films.
Probably, besides Lane Blacktop, everyone associates you, ironically, with Reservoir Dogs. Tell us a little bit about the background of how did the Reservoir Dogs script come to you, and how did you get it out there and basically get it made?
Well, a friend of mine, Laurie Post, was a neighbor, a close friend of Lawrence Bender's, and she knew that they were trying to get this movie on, and they were actually looking for someone to help get it made and possibly even direct it. At that point, Quentin wasn't thinking of directing it, and so they sent it to me with the idea of me as a director, and I loved it. I said, terrific, I'd love to do this. And so then they set up a meeting with Quentin, and the day that we met, I remember he didn't even have a car at the time. He took a streetcar from Glendale or someplace to Hollywood Boulevard, where there was a little ice cream shop called C.C. Brown's, and we each had a hot fudge sundae, and he told me the bad news for me, that that day he had sold True Romance. He could afford to hold out to direct Reservoir Dogs, and which he did. I said, well, I wish you a lot of luck. And he said, well, I'd like for you to be involved anyway. I mean, do you think you'd want to help with the picture? And I said, well, if I can, I will. And I tried to find money for it, and I did, and that's how the picture got made.
Also, I've been reading Quentin Tarantino book written by, I think it's Wensley Clarkson, and I think it was Lawrence Bender or somebody else. It was reassuring to know that you were around, even though that you didn't intrude, but it was sort of like reassuring for them that you were around and involved.
Well, I didn't really meddle. I went to the set a few times, but I went to the rushes every day, and I told Quentin what I thought were some of the just technical problems. You know, when you're making a film for the first time, I didn't have any question about his artistic ability, but there's certain things that you just don't know when you're first starting to do it. And so I would point out certain technical things, and I feel I did make a contribution beyond just getting the film made.
Quentin Tarantino, with especially those two movies, has become, like in the book, the rock and roll star director. Was there any inkling that this would happen to him?
I think that kind of phenomenal shooting star kind of rise in fame and whatever is something that nobody can anticipate, other than the fact that both Jack Nicholson and Quentin of all the people that I've been involved with, I would say they both knew from the get-go that they were stars. It wasn't they were going to become stars. They were stars, when they first started their careers. And so they weren't surprised. Therefore, I guess we all should have known.
From the great success of Reservoir Dogs, I just want to go into not a little film, bit of a disaster called Avalanche Express, and sadly, Robert Shaw died during production, and the director, Mark Ron, he died as well.
Yes.
So what happens in that case, Monty? They just give you a call, quick, Monty, help out. Director sadly has just died. What can you do? And obviously it would be a very, very hard task to just sort of walk in and take over.
Well, it was difficult from a lot of points of view. I felt an obligation to Mark Robeson and wanted to fulfill his dream. But at the same time, he was very sick during the shooting of the picture. Just a lot of things fell through the cracks, and there were a lot of serious problems. So it was my job also to be worth what I was being paid and to help out the production company and make the picture as good as I could. And so I did have to do some rewriting on the script and shoot a lot of new material that wasn't anticipated. And I also, unfortunately, had to fire Robeson's editor because she was so devoted to him that it was hard for her to accept any changes that we might make.
And you also took over from Tom Grise for The Greatest.
That's true, yeah.
So did you get a reputation for taking...
I hope I didn't get a reputation for being the cause of...
No, for taking care of problems.
Like the vice president,
We haven't got time, but I want to mention a couple of great films which I saw on Australian TV as well, China 9, Liberty 37, and Cockfight, of course, which is another great Warren Oates film. I quickly want to ask you about Iguana, because I haven't seen Iguana.
Well, Iguana is one of my favorites as well, but it's hard to justify it because it's such a difficult production and we had so little means with which to work. I liken it to a production of Our Town, the Thornton Wilder play, where there's no sets and there's no props and everybody just kind of mimes everything. And it was a little bit like that. It was like a bare bones film, but in spite of that, I think it has a lot of power.
Well, we're just about out of time, Monty. I just want to ask you, what are you up to at the moment?
Preparing a film called Cody and Farrell. It's a wonderful romantic adventure thriller, and we're in the process of sending scripts to actors at this very moment.
Well, good luck with that, and thank you very much for taking time to talk with us, Monte Hellman. Thank you very much, Monte Hellman.
Thank you.